Going to continue our conversation here with the Homecoming Group. As I mentioned on Flashpoint, it was 2014. Crane's Detroit business decided to start inviting Detroit expats back to the city for a Detroit homecoming. Completely took off. This was the 11th edition of Detroit Homecoming, and I'm so tickled to have a number of those who've come back to town. Keir Worthy is here, a hip-hop pioneer who, as I said on Flashpoint, I know you've lost count of all of the artists that you've influenced and encouraged over the years. Michael Shearer is here from Atlante Group, Capital Group, lives in Los Angeles, back in Detroit, though kind of more than part-time, I suppose, building student housing near your alma mater of the University of Detroit. Emily Gale is coined the phrase, say nice things about Detroit, and so many people do now, and she is in the process of lived in Hawaii for years, but now starting to make the move back to Detroit. And Claire Pfeiffer is producing this year's homecoming, and she's with Crane's Detroit business. Gang, I wanted to hear some real classic Detroit stories from all of you. Claire, I want to start with you because we were just talking about music and the way that the artists that you talk to over the years from everywhere and the way that they feel when it comes time to play in Detroit.
I mean, there are a lot of places that get the publicity or the accolades for music, but Detroit not only has the talent within the music community, it is like a Valhalla. Other acts come to Detroit to snag musicians for their tours.
That's right.
Actually, Lady Gaga's tour director was from here. I think his name is Kern Bradley. So many groups have at least one musician from Detroit, because we just have that ability. And every artist I can speak of, from the man down to the woman, loves playing Detroit because they say we have the best music fans in the world. We know the material, we know it intimately, we know obscure cuts, we know album cuts, and we push them when they perform.
I have pursued this theory among so many Detroit musicians that I've talked to over the years, and I'm curious as to whether you have a theory. There's a lot of great music cities, but very few where it's also homegrown. I mean, people all went to Nashville to record, that's great. Right. But Detroit created and it was such a wide span from jazz to R&B and Motown, Aretha, who was not Motown, by the way. Right, but still. And now on to techno, the world's most popular music worldwide. How do you believe it all incubates from, what is the secret sauce here?
Well, two things. To rewind, I gotta give props to my guys in techno, because I emerged with those guys, whether it's Jeff Mills, Juan Atkins, who I managed, Derek May, Mike Banks, who's been holding it down for decades with Submerge over on the Boulevard. All the guys, who have not only taken the music world, but they've taken Detroit worldwide.
Yes.
They've been.
Carl Craig has become a good friend of mine, and to hear his stories about playing all over the world is mind-blowing to me.
Derek May, in fact, Derek May and I used to hang out at Emily's back in the day.
It all comes back to Emily.
I call Emily the icon.
She is.
So,
you actually hate icons.
So, these guys have been de facto, unheralded, and unpaid ambassadors of the city.
No doubt.
For 4 decades now.
But how'd they all come out of here?
I think my theory is that, everybody says something in the water, but more than that, I think Detroit is, though it's a big city, there's a small town aspect to it, and everybody feels like, I've got to be better than New York. I've got to be better than LA. And so we work really hard.
Yeah.
So they're shedding in the basement. They're in the garage. They used to be in Battle of the Bands, and you really were trying to strive for a certain level of excellence, because you're like, I can't get out of here if I'm not super good.
Chip on the shoulder is not a bad thing, right?
Yeah, right. But it's not an aggressive. Like, I live in New York. I say people in Brooklyn have a chip on both shoulders, right? They're just mad about whatever all the time. Detroiters, it's not an anger. It's a desire, a drive.
Yeah.
And they've translated that.
Michael, tell me about the way Detroit has stayed with you then, and how it manifests itself in your life.
Well, I think similarly to what you're talking about with music, we are makers, we are doers, we are problem solvers, right? We are faced with the world's problems, and we figure out how to get it done. Right? That, I think, cuts through everybody at Homecoming for sure, but the people that I work with, the people that we house. By the way, in addition to student housing, we're doing affordable housing throughout the neighborhoods as well. So bringing a blend.
The issue of our time.
Exactly. So while we want to provide clean, safe housing for students near the university, we want to make sure that we're integrating with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's critical. But see, in doing that, there's a situation we're trying to solve. Right. Let's bring people together. Let's create something together.
There's an assembly line component.
Yes,
to
there
living
is.
here, even if you've never worked on the line, there's
Yeah.
that there's something about that too, that work ethic.
The work ethic is definitely a part of that. We are, I guess, systems people, if you will. So much of what we do, we start with whatever our clay is that we mold, and we end up with a product. We're starting with properties that are boarded up or run down, have been left behind, and we're cleaning them up and bringing them back to life. But that's just the starting point. It's the cornerstone, if you will. Because what we're doing is we're giving people a place where they can get a good night's sleep, they can rest and re-energize and recharge and go out and be as creative as they can be makers and doers out in the world. Right?
I don't want to skip past the part. I mean, have you spent much time thinking about how did we let it get so bad? How did we fall apart there for so long?
There's so many things wrapped around that. It's a complex situation, and I think rather than trying to figure out exactly what went wrong, who was at fault or whatever, it's more let's acknowledge that we hit a spot, we hit a down, a bottom, if you will, and we're building back. I don't know if you're aware of this, but back in 2013, 14, I was called in as a consultant to help work with the city. And I wrote the strategic plan for the planning development department as we were consolidating, agencies. And the one thing that struck me more, I mean, there was a lot of process involved with cleaning things up, right, making things better for the future. The one thing that struck me the most was the day I got a call at the end of the day, and Mayor Duggan was relatively new, team was relatively new, and there was a fire in an abandoned building, and 2 families were put out on the street because they could not be let back in the building, of course. It was going to be 4 degrees below zero that night. And the question was, where are they going to be housed? Within 45 minutes, the 2 people who were responsible for that within the city got them housed for the night, and one of the agencies said, we'll put them up long term. They just needed to make sure that they were going to get the funding they needed to do it, and the city said, by all means. Now, this is back in 14 when things were still relatively broken.
Yeah.
But that human component came out, and we're all one big family, right? We're going to make sure people are taken care of, no matter our structural flaws and things we need to fix on
We
that
always
side.
marvel at Detroit's reputation as being one of the most charitable, most giving cities. No matter where it is, its citizens tend to give a little bit more. All right, Icon.
Okay.
It is funny that you are a bit of an inflection point for so many people's stories about Detroit.
It's heartwarming. I mean, I can't tell you how often it touches me, the things that people say and respond. And when I used to talk to school kids when they would come in, my thing I used to say to them was, Detroit's a big enough city that it makes a difference in the world, and it's a small enough city that an individual can make a difference. And I really felt that. And at the time, what I was doing was, it was so different. Homecoming this week, I mean, I don't know if it's sophistication, but the things people talk about are so beyond the way we did things. It was before fax machines, before everything else. But listening to everybody, it's so exciting to see the brain power that is being exercised every day in the city of Detroit, coming up with ideas, going through lab tech, whatever it is over there by the train station, and the innovation, and so far beyond where we were, and the grant money and the capital money that's there wasn't there for us back in the 70s and 80s. We were sticking our hands in our pocket and trying to pay for everything, and it was tough, really hard. And I'm so excited for people that there's so much support for this ideas that are coming out of, and these last 3 days, the ideas that you heard and heard people talk about, whether it was the panel discussions and somebody would ask a question, like when Mary Kramer was interviewing Mayor Duggan, it was such an honest conversation, what could be done that he hasn't done, and what. It's very exciting. It's fun to feel like I had something to do with it.
Well, I was going to, for those who haven't heard the story, talk a little bit about how you came up with Say Nice Things About Detroit.
Well, we were in Florida on a January day, and everybody's in Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and people were, hey, Emily Pooh, what are you guys, are you happy to be out of Detroit? And we were going, no, what are you talking about? So we decided that over Easter weekend, we would fly a banner on the beaches of Florida, because then you could fly banners for a couple $100, $400 or something. And we hired a banner Easter weekend that would go up and down the coast of Miami to Fort Lauderdale that said, "Hi Detroiters, enjoy Florida, say nice things about Detroit, Emily." And we got in touch with a friend of ours who was with UPI, because we kind of knew that, why fly the banner if you don't get the story out, right? And the story got out everywhere, and it got on the back page of Detroit News, and the response was phenomenal. People felt like they had something to attach to, because at that time there wasn't much positive. We were murder capital of the world. And then when the Republicans were coming to town, and they didn't want to come to town back in 1980, and they were all saying they were going to come to Detroit with, pack their guns or, pack their brown bag. They wanted to go back to Kansas City. We arranged to fly banners in all the state capitals. And we had John McMurray with WJR, watch the weather every day. We only got him up in 31 cities, but we got him up. And, like in Dallas, they said it's the Motor City mouth, and then all the newspapers would call and say, "Why did you do this?" And we said, "We want all those Republicans coming for the Republican convention. Don't stay in your hotel rooms. Don't plan on packing your lunch and packing what else. Please get out on the street, and we're all ready to give you warm, welcome, reassuring downtown Detroit hugs. And get down here and get out on the street." And so that's how it all started.
It's so great.
It's wonderful.
Claire, these are the stories that you get to hear I mentioned the 11th edition of this, but this is what makes it work, right?
Awesome. The connections, being in your orbit, you're like, we are all so lucky, because I don't think any day I've seen you this week, you've not been smiling. So, but just really the positivity, and also everybody who's here is here to listen, to learn, to see where they can make a change, make some impact, whether it's leaving a donation behind, like making connections to inspire other Detroiters to, do something here. When you were talking about everywhere you go, you run into Detroiters, and you can be ambassadors for coming back home, finding a way to be part of what's happening here. It's one of the most inspiring things we do.
Well, you've all inspired me. I really appreciate you all being here, and thanks for being back for another homecoming. And let's do it again next year.
You got it. Thanks. Thanks for having us.
But thanks so much for being with us here on ClickonDetroit.com.